How'd you like to listen to .NET Rocks with no ads? Easy. Become a patron. For just $5 a month, you get access to a private RSS feed where all the shows have no ads. $20 a month will get you that and a special .NET Rocks patron mug. Sign up now at patreon.netrocks.com. Hey, Carl and Richard here with your 2024 NDC schedule.
We'll be at as many NDC conferences as possible this year, and you should consider attending no matter what.
NDC Oslo is happening June 10th through the 14th. Get your tickets at ndcoslo.com.
The Copenhagen Developers Festival happens August 26th through the 30th. Early bird discount ends April 26th. Tickets at cphdevfest.com.
NDC Porto is happening October 14th through the 18th. The early bird discount ends June 14th. Tickets at ndcporto.com.
And we'll see you there, we hope.
Hey, welcome back to .NET Rocks. I'm Carl Franklin.
And I'm Richard Campbell.
I'm in my studio, and Richard is in Sweden.
I am Sweden. I'm at the Castle Conf in Örebro.
Nice.
Just outside of Stockholm.
Very nice.
Yeah.
And we're going to have a really good talk today with Giorgi. But first, let's do Better Know Framework.
Awesome. What do you got?
Richard, you probably saw this already, but DARPA revealed that an experimental X-62A AI-controlled jet successfully faced a human pilot during an in-air dogfight test carried out last year.
Fun, huh?
Yeah. You probably read about it when it happened, but...
Yeah. Well, and to be clear, an X-62 is an F-16.
Yeah, it's just customized.
Yeah, they were already fly-by-wire, so they just added in this new set of modules to fly itself.
And apparently, human pilots were on board with controls to disable the AI system, but DARPA says the pilots didn't need to use the safety switch at any point. So isn't that interesting? And a little scary, but, just warfare. I guess I would rather have something being flown by wire than flown by a pilot, but... for the pilot's sake anyway.
Yeah, apparently recently they put the head of the Air Force in the backseat of the F-16 and did the same thing. So,
oh, wow.
They're bringing to light that this is how good the software is now, boys.
Right. Yeah, it does bring up a little Star Wars-y angst, sort of a...
Although, curiously, they modeled all the Star Wars battles after World War I air dogfights, so...
Yeah, I was thinking of episode 1, where all the little drones were flying around.
Yep.
So like little gnats, like little mosquitoes, just shooting darts at people. And I thought, oh my God, is that what we have to look forward to? Well, anyway.
Yeah, the Air Force has this project called Loyal Wingman, which is unmanned vehicles that the pilots are flying with. So.
Wow.
Things are getting interesting.
Yeah, they certainly are. So anyway, that's what I got. Who's talking to us today, Richard?
Gravity Comment Office Show 1855, the one we did with Ted Neward back in July last year. We were talking about multiple types of data stores, and we called it multimodal, which was fun. And Andy Perth had this somewhat long comment, but I thought it was relevant to what we were talking about today. He says, if ORM is the Vietnam of computer science, and of course we were talking to Ted Neward.
That's a reference to an old show.
Old set of blog posts, too.
Yeah.
And my repeated trips back to some kind of ORM must make me the U.S. State Department. Ted would appreciate my citing that paper when we were discussing how to layer an API on top of an insanely complex XML model back around 2007. That's the whole complaint about NHybridate was that the XML was out of control, right?
Yep.
So I have to snark at your comments on the moves of using XML to describe XML schema on two grounds. The first is XML bodies first tried non-XML formats with DTD. Okay, that did suck more. That's true.
Yeah, it did.
And 2, slipping even further down the rabbit hole of stuff for XML should be XML, they went even further to add a programming language called XSLT, which I did some work in, which was written in XML and should cure anyone of ever complaining about mere semicolons as too much punctuation.
Yeah.
Because you have never used brackets in your life until you wrote XSLT. My God.
That's why we had tools to write that stuff, because it was not
kidding.
Yeah, it wasn't very
Sometimes
friendly.
You're the tool.
That's right.
For my sins, I used to teach a multi-day course on the W3 XML schema to geologists and mining engineers. That insanely complex model encompassed geospatially located ore bodies described as full 3D structures somewhere in Australia.
Wow.
It also included laboratory assay results for sampling cores drilled to find such bodies. All that salted with a dash of Sarbanes-Oxley traceability on top. And that experience taught me 2 things. 1, never try to get scientists from different disciplines to agree on a definition. And 2, XML can respect complex object graphs. Liberal use of the ID attribute is the key. Amazing extensible results are possible. Wow. So keep the government theme and borrow a sentiment from Winston Churchill. I'd like to remose that XML is the democracy of data structures. Well, TBL liked it, but even he backed off eventually.
Oh, man.
Yeah. I love it, but yeah, Andy, you're a true believer. I like it. Mm-hmm. And so a copy of Music to Go By is on its way to you. And if you'd like a copy of Music to Go By, write a comment on the website at .netrocks.com or on the Facebooks. We publish every show there. And if you comment there and I read it on the show, we'll send you a copy of Music to Go By.
Hey, did I tell you that Code in a Castle is back on this year?
I heard rumor.
Yeah. So it's going to be the last week of September. And it's in the same castle in Tuscany. So if you missed out, and you regretted it, go check it out, Code in a Castle. And also the video from last year is up there. So anyway, that's all I want to say about that.
Cool.
All right, let's bring Giorgi on. Giorgi Dalakishvili is a software developer with more than a decade of experience. He works mainly with C#, ASP.NET Core, REST, MAUI, Xamarin, Entity Framework Core, AWS, and SQL Server. So, just a couple of
things,
interests
here and there.
Just a couple of things. He has also worked with many other frameworks and systems such as GraphQL, ASP.NET MVC, ASP.NET Web API, WCF, Avalonia, WinForms, Oracle, and others. In short, he doesn't know what he wants to be when he grows up.
Nice.
Giorgi is an open source author and contributor on GitHub and a member of the .NET Foundation. Welcome, Giorgi.
Thanks for inviting me to the .NET Rocks. I have been listening to it since 10 years already, I think. So it's a pleasure to be on the show.
Awesome.
Yeah, well, you're welcome. It's great to have you here. We are really getting used to a lot of the people that spent their career listening to .NET Rocks now being guests. So it's very cool. It's very cool to have you. So you're here to talk about EF queries and debugging them visually. So that caught my interest. What do you mean by that?
So one of the biggest well, not disadvantages, but one of the biggest downsides of using an ORM and any kind of ORM, probably not just Entity Framework Core, is that it hides the SQL behind the link queries, and it tries to abstract all the database related stuff behind the strongly typed queries and C#, which is very comfortable. Definitely, but also can cause some performance issues if you are not careful writing your queries. And some people think that you can just learn EFCore and you don't need to look at the generated SQL, or SQL is an old language and we don't need it anymore. But
yeah. It's kind of like if your car is going along fine and then it just starts going very slow and you think, oh, this car stinks, I'm going to bring it into the shop, rather than, having a look under the hood and actually trying to see what's going on. You might discover the problem.
Yeah, and actually it's not as frightening as some people probably think. So for me personally, for me personally, when I started programming about 15 or 17 years already ago, there was no ORM. So if you needed to interact with database, you had to write your either ad hoc SQL in C# code or storage procedures, which was even more painful. And so Entity Framework is definitely nice, but you should also definitely understand the SQL behind it, and it will change the way you write your Entity Framework queries, and it will also make your code and your application more performant, definitely.
So is it easy to discover what SQL or SQL is being created under the hood and sent to the SQL Server Engine with the Entity Framework?
Yeah, so even without the extensions that I wrote that we will be talking about in a couple of minutes, it's still very easy with Entity Framework. You can either, I think it's two SQL string built-in method in Entity Framework that to get the SQL and use the SQL, or you can just configure logging in your application, and when you debug your application, you can use the generated SQL in the output window of Visual Studio.
Let's go back to toSQL string. Is that extension available on the connection, on the DB set, on the?
Yeah, it's available on iQueryable. As far as I remember, so you just take your query and call this it's called toQuery string if I remember it correctly, and you will get the query string programmatically. Or as I said, you can configure logging and you can use all the SQL statements in the output window of Visual Studio.
Right. You also hinted at a tool that you wrote that makes it much easier. So let's talk about that. That sounds fun.
Yeah. So my tool goes a little bit beyond just getting the SQL query. So this is a Visual Studio extension. You download it and install directly from the marketplace. You can do it directly inside Visual Studio without leaving it and just searching for it in the extensions. And essentially, it's a debugger visualizer. So a debugger visualizer is a kind of extension that lets you visualize the object when you hover your mouse pointer on the variable.
Nice.
So just like you can view the string or XML or JSON in a nicely formatted way in Visual Studio, when you hover your pointer on the iQueryable variable inside Visual Studio, a new item will appear in the overlay or whatever it is called in Visual Studio, and it will say Query Plan Visualizer. So when you click on it, the extension will actually fetch the query execution plan from the database and display it in a nice graphical HTML formatted inside the web view. So you can use the query itself, and also you can use the plan that the database executed. You can use the plan that the database generated to execute your query under the hood.
Can you tell us one more time what that Visual Studio extension is called?
Yeah, it's called EFCore Visualizer.
Okay. And is this using your Entity Framework.exceptions library under the hood, which is the next thing I'd like to talk about?
No, it doesn't.
It's something separate, completely separate.
Yeah, that's a separate library.
Okay.
So my experience has been if you've got a problem with an Entity Framework call, that you should just rewrite it to call a stored procedure. Like that's the workaround. Like I really appreciate what you're doing here. That I've written an expression in LINQ, and that translates into this query in SQL Server, and it's a table scan, so it's sucking. But I guess the question is someone actually going to modify the database to make this perform better, or do we just switch to a stored procedure, and then the DBA can optimize the stored procedure.
Whoa, Richard, you're opening a can of worms here, man.
It wouldn't be the first time.
We're going back to the Oronini versus Ted Neward SmackDown here.
Yeah. I don't know. What do you think?
Anyway, Giorgi, what do you think? Yeah.
Well, no, you don't necessarily have to turn it into a stored procedure. Thanks, Scott. You can, well, in most cases, it's either a missing index from your table, or your query is just written in a way that can't utilize the existing indexes on the table, or maybe in some cases you just have to redesign your table because it's not designed the most optimal way, so your queries are going to be slow no matter how hard and no matter what you try.
Yeah, I just question is, I didn't write that query, Entity Framework wrote it. If it's not utilizing my index as well, what are my choices here? Like, what are you actually able to do?
So the most common reasons that I have seen that your query does not use indexes is, for example, there is a term searchable queries, I think. Mm-hmm. So if you have a condition like there is a date of birth, for example, in the database table, and you want to find all the records where the year is, for example, 2000. Mm-hmm. And if you just call the date part function in SQL Server, or date.year in C# and compare it to 2000, then it's impossible for the database to use an existing index, even if it's there, because for every record it has to calculate the year from the dates on the fly, and it can't use the index.
Yeah. So it's now going to process every row to do that for you.
Yeah.
Whereas if you gave it a range, then it could actually write a better query that it could be indexed.
So in this case, for example, the solution will be to find all records where date of birth is more than 2000 1st January and less or equal than 2000 December 31.
Right.
And in this case, you don't have any more calculations on the fly. You just give the range, as you said, that you want all the records where the date of birth value is from this value until this value, and as long as the index is on the table, it will use the index, and it will be a lot faster because it will just scan the subset of the rows that it needs to return your results.
Right.
So that's the most common mistake I think I have seen. And it's also easy to make that mistake because when you start writing your query, it's natural to write it like that if you don't think what's going on under the hood.
Yeah.
So that's one of the reasons why it's important to understand what's going when you write a query in C#, and you can't also blame the developers always, because if you have just 100 or 1000 rows in your test database, it is going to be fast. So they can't even notice that there's a problem under the hood.
No, and then you have 1 million rows and you notice right away.
Yeah.
And you could still blame the developers, let's face it.
But I could see, setting a date range is kind of a nuisance because do you really go, greater than equal to 2001, 01, and you need the time too. So 0000 and less than, 1231 and 2359, 59.999, or that'd be less than equal to, like,
Richard, we said we weren't going to quote code on this show. We weren't going to read code.
But it's such a dev thing to say, hey, if the year in this date is 2000, get it.
Yeah.
Just not understanding that you just defeated all indexing. Like the index doesn't have a chance. Because it's not sargeable. Because Giorgi pulled that one out today. It's the correct term, but not everybody knows it. But yeah, okay. But I mean, therein lies the point here is presumably as the developer, you're also responsible for the database and you're just trying to figure out why. And so you've assembled all the bits together to say, this is the query that's generated. Here's the query plan that it did. Yeah. Now go figure it out. Like you've now got the ingredients to say, can I write this as an expression that will query more effectively, or do I have to go to all the other approaches?
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Another thing to consider is if we use the same example, like if you are searching for records where the date of birth is larger than the year 2000, then it may use index even if you write it correctly. But if the condition changes and you want records, for example, from 1950, and it turns out that like 95% of your records in your database have date of birth which is higher than 1950 or 1920 or whatever, then the database may decide that it doesn't make sense to use the index because I have to return almost all the records that are in the table. So why bother with the index? So it will still not use the index because it's faster to just scan the whole table and skip the index. So you have to be careful with it because depending on the type of data and depending on the conditions that you are putting in the where clause, it may decide to use the index in one situation and not use an index in another situation on a different type of record.
Sure.
So databases are tricky.
Yeah, no, it always is. And like, I love the one where they go, greater than January 1st and less than December 31st. It's like, you just left off all the December 31st people.
Yeah.
Yeah. So it's probably better to just write less than 1 January of 2001 and you won't leave anyone out there.
I hate date math. I hate it. Yeah, I had a date math bug in one of my websites just recently about listing gigs. Like the day before the gig, it disappeared from the site. I'm like, I used a plus instead of a minus, or less than instead of a greater than.
That's it. Yeah, I love it. Yeah, no, it's these are the things we chase around. So being able to see into the data set and answer a bunch of questions. Did I write the link query wrong? Did the actual output query be incorrect, or just badly perform it? Like now you have a bunch of choices on how to fix it. You could tweak the database, you can tweak your expression, you could switch over to a different methodology. Like you have a bunch of choices, but at least that's the problem.
Yeah. So this extension supports SQL Server and Postgres, so you can use the graphical query plan for both of these databases.
It's cool.
Yeah, you can see if there are any table scans which will make your queries slow.
Yeah.
If it's using indexes, is it doing an index scan or index seek or things like that? Like reading and understanding the query plans is a separate science, probably.
Its own set of skills, although the documentation's better than it ever was. It's easier now than it used to be. It used to be really, you had to know what query plan statements were. Like it took a lot.
I can sense thousands of document database users listening now going, sucks to be you.
Yeah, if we don't have to write any for loops there, kiddo. Sometimes you need to look for data in your document store too, right?
Yeah.
Now, if there was one right way to do this, everybody would do it. The reality is there's a bunch of ways to be successful, and there's a bunch of ways to get into trouble, and it's good to have tooling that'll help you go down the right path.
True. So I know you said it before, it's just an extension, but when you were explaining it, how to use it, I was thinking, what's the name of it again? So can you go over like one more time, just how you would use this? It shows up as an extension. Where does it manifest itself in Visual Studio?
Yeah, you can. So once you install it, you start debugging your runs debugger as you would in any other case. You hover over your iQueryable variables. So if the query and toolist async, you can't use a query plan. You need to have a iQueryable. And when you hover your mouse on the iQueryable variable in Visual Studio, you will see a query plan visualizer under the magnifying glass that Visual Studio shows whenever you are trying to inspect variables.
Yep, very cool.
And when you click on the query plan visualizer, it will open a new window. It will take a second or two to actually fetch the plan from the database, and it will render the plan in an embedded web view control.
That's very cool.
If the database connection is slow or the query takes more than 5 seconds, then it will time out because that's the hard timeout limit by the Visual Studio itself. So, so that's one thing to keep in mind.
That's great.
And also it's not very helpful for queries where you have first or default async or count async or similar queries which just materialize the results immediately, and you don't have an iQueryable, because for such queries you don't have an iQueryable variable. So it's you could remove the calls to the to first and count or sum and so on, but it's not the same query now, because you are fetching the whole list and not just count or sum or first item.
So it's nice to be able to debug what you're actually using rather than have to appease the debugger just to see it. That's cool. I guess maybe it's time to take a break. When we come back, can we talk about the Entity Framework exceptions library?
Yeah, just one thing that I wanted to add is that this extension uses existing libraries to render the SQL Server and Postgres query plans. So I wanted to say thanks to the authors of those libraries, because without those projects, I would not be able to build this extension. So
yeah, good point.
Thanks again for building the SQL Server and Postgres Visualizer libraries.
Cool.
Excellent. All right, hold that thought. We'll be right back after these very important messages. And we're back. It's .NET Rocks. I'm Carl Franklin. That's Richard Campbell.
Hey there.
Hey, and that is Giorgi Dalakishvili. And we're talking about Entity Framework and what's going on under the hood. And he's got a great Visual Studio extension that you can use to see what's going on with your queries under the hood. And I wanted to bring up this a couple other actually really great GitHub repos that you have. One is Entity Framework Exceptions, and the other is duckdb.net. But let's talk about the exceptions right now, Entity Framework Exceptions thing. Tell us about that.
So this is a library that started, I guess most libraries start from an internal usage, because something that I found copying from one project to another, and I decided to wrap it in a library and publish, thinking that others would find it useful. So what it does is, again, when using Entity Framework, and let's say you have a table with a unique constraint, for example, email address is a unique constraint in your table, and you are inserting customers or whatever in your table, and if you try to insert a record with the same email, the database will throw an error because the unique constraint is violated. And when in Entity Framework, this means that you will get an DB update exception in your C# code. Bad thing with that is that DB update exception doesn't really tell you whether this was the unique constraint violation or the save. The insert failed because of some other error in the database.
So you need more detail.
Somewhere, yeah. So you have to check the inner exception of this DB update exception and get the innermost exception, the deepest one.
It's the start of the whole thing, right? Like that's the one that's all the way in is the one was the original error, and then it cascades outwards.
Yeah, that's yeah, usually that's the most interesting one, which gives you
lowest level. I think you froze.
Yeah, I think I'm back now.
Oh, he's back.
Now you're back. So yeah, it's the lowest level exception, the one that started it all.
Yeah. So the lowest level inner exception has if it's an SQL Server database, then it will be an SQL exception. If it's a Postgres database, it will be NPG or whatever it's called exception. And depending on the database, you have to check either the error number property or the error code property or whatever the library user puts there. And then again, depending on the database, the error number may be different between different database engines. So if you want to find the root cause, and if you want to know that it's a unique constraint violation, you have to dig deeper and write some database-specific code in your entity framework code where you are trying to abstract over the database implementation.
Mm-hmm.
So what this library does is that it adds an interceptor to your entity framework DB context, and whenever there is an exception generated from save changes, it will dig into the innermost exception and translate the database-specific error in different type of exceptions that is provided by this library. So you can just change your code to catch unique constraint exception, and if your code hits that catch block, you now know for sure that this catch block was caught because this catch block was hit because of the unique constraint violation in the database.
Mm-hmm.
And even if you switch between databases, and if you go from SQL Server to Oracle or MySQL or any other major databases, your try-catch stays the same because the database abstracts, because the entity framework exceptions library abstracts it along between all the databases, so you don't have to update your code, and you just put your exception handling code in the sketch block.
And the expectation is that all the other stuff that's in the exception handling block is just residual of the initial error.
Yeah, you can show that this email address is already in use or whatever you need.
Yeah.
So yes, apart from unique constraints, it handles some other cases, like when you exceed the length of the column, for example, or you provide a null value for the column that does not allow null, and so on. You will get a strongly typed exception in these cases instead of generic DB update exception.
Right.
Okay, should we move on to DuckDB? First of all, what is DuckDB and why do we need a DuckDB.net for it?
Yeah, DuckDB is a embedded database, just like SQLite.
Mm-hmm.
So you don't need to set up any database server or complex configuration. No complex configuration is needed.
Okay.
It's relatively new, but it's becoming popular in the data science world, especially in the Python community, I think, because Python is frequently used for data science and data manipulation and things in these types of projects.
Yep.
The main difference between DuckDB and SQLite is that SQLite is transactional OLTP-oriented database, and DuckDB is OLAP database more geared for analytical queries and analytical processing.
Right.
It's
is it all in memory, or is it can it persist to disk too? Imagine if it's in memory, it can persist.
No, it can persist to disk as well. It has its own database format. It can also run queries on top of CSV files, which is very cool.
Yeah, very cool.
The old CSV files suddenly become queryable.
Right.
It can also run queries on top of Parquet files. And what's also cool is that you can run queries on top of JSON files, and you can also run queries on files that are stored in S3 buckets in AWS. So
nice.
You don't, and if you have Parquet files in S3, it will just fetch the part of the files that is needed to answer your queries by using the HTTP range headers.
How do you pass the S3 credentials to it?
It has its own secret store, I think, where you can save your credentials. And for development purposes, it can also use your AWS credentials from your home directory,
Right.
where you store the token and all the temporary credentials that you are using.
That's cool.
Mm-hmm.
So that's a short overview of DuckDB. It's very fast for analytical queries, and if you compare it to Pandas, which is very popular library in Python, or Polars, which is also a popular library for data manipulation in R. It's in Rust, I think. It's very fast compared to them.
And so DuckDB.net is an ADO provider for DuckDB?
Yes.
ADO.net?
Yes, that's right.
Wow.
It's an ADO.net provider for DuckDB, and
very cool.
You can query DuckDB databases, CSV files, Parquet files, basically whatever DuckDB supports, you can do it from .NET.
Mm-hmm.
You can also write to the DuckDB tables, and DuckDB also has this very helpful commands for exporting the database to CSV or Parquet or whatever file you need. So you can just use this provider to write to DuckDB and then execute the copy command, and it will copy to CSV or Parquet or whatever format you specify.
That's very cool. So you have your hands in a lot of different technologies, which is, kind of typical of people that, do open source work and stuff these days. But you also have been doing open source and working on other repos as well, and especially as you're a member of the .NET Foundation. So can you tell me what's going on in the world of open source as you see it right now? What's hot?
Well, I think the usual problem, which is Microsoft in most cases versus the open source community. Well, maybe not really versus, but sometimes people expect Microsoft to provide all the libraries they need.
Right.
Yeah.
Sometimes they are angry when Microsoft comes with new library because it kills some existing open source library.
Mm-hmm.
So
the usual complaints.
Usual complaints.
Right.
And the usual complaints from users who accept support for free for open source libraries.
How's your experience been with these? You say in your notes here that you received some sponsorship from AWS.net for DuckDB.net. That's pretty cool, huh?
Yeah, it happened this March. So yeah, it's probably useful library if AWS thinks that it's worth this sponsorship.
Mm-hmm.
Right. So do they find that people using it on AWS in the cloud?
Actually, one of the members of the committee who picks these libraries was asking on Twitter which library to consider for sponsorship, and I mentioned my project.
Mm-hmm.
Mm-hmm.
It did not get picked that much, but after a couple of months later, I got this surprise from AWS. So
wow,
was that a one-time payment or is it recurring?
So it's a recurring payment of $500 for 1 year. So 12 payments.
Wow, that's great! Congratulations.
Thank you.
Yeah, not you're not going to retire on that, but it's nice to at least get some compensation for it. That's cool.
But it also shows, like you said, that it's an indication that they find it valuable, right?
Mm-hmm.
And so my question is, why? Why is this like something that AWS wants to put their support behind, and not because it doesn't deserve it, but do they find that their customers are using it in the cloud? Like, is DuckDB something that you would use in the cloud as opposed to, I don't know, a SQL Server or a document database to save time and money?
Well, it's not an alternative for SQL Server, but it can be useful. For example, just recently I needed to use it in my work projects.
Mm-hmm.
Mm-hmm.
So I'm a little bit biased, I guess. but one of our vendors is sending a batch of Puppet files daily when data changes on their side, which we need to import in our database.
Sure.
So we set up an AWS Lambda, which uses DuckDB under the hood to query the Puppet files from S3. So they upload the Puppet files to a shared S3 bucket, and the Lambda will run in response to the new file and use DuckDB nets to read the Puppet files and save to Postgres database. So yeah, I think it can be useful in different use cases, and to be honest, I won't be surprised if one day AWS comes out with a new service which uses DuckDB under the hood, because they have done it frequently with many different open source projects like Elasticsearch and Redis also, I think, if I am not mistaken, and probably some other services as well.
Yeah, no, your numbers are excellent. Clearly, you're building stuff that helps people, and they're starring and forking and contributing. So that's pretty cool.
Yeah.
Do you get a lot of contributors on some of these projects? I was just going to take a peek and think, because you kind of do that one on your own. The visualizer, like they're fairly unique products. It takes the right work.
Yeah. So for DuckDB.net, I think it's the project with most contributors.
Yeah.
I'm not sure in terms of source code, how is it, but I think it had like 10 or 15 contributors. So some of the contributions may be small, but I remember one or two contributors who contributed quite a significant portion of the code.
Right.
And it definitely helps, because when you are coding alone all the time, these projects, it can become boring sometimes, or you can become tired, which is obvious. And it's nice to have a person who helps even from time to time, because we get tired also.
Sure. Yeah, sure.
Can't write the same code every day, gets old after a while.
Yeah, indeed.
Yeah, that's probably one more reasons why the sponsorship is important, because it's a show. It's a way to say thank you to the person who spends their own time working on something for free.
Is there anything that we missed in these projects that you'd want to mention before we move on?
So, Entity Framework Exceptions is the most popular project, open source projects that I have, with more than 1 million downloads.
Wow,
in case of SQL Server and Postgres, and more than 1,000 stars on GitHub.
Wow. That's great.
And what's your role at .NET Foundation? Do you sit on some committees?
No. I just wanted to join and see.
Oh, you're a member.
What was going on there?
Yeah, I remember. But you sound like someone who's doing serious work in open source, so you could have some good conversations there too. They're all trying to get better.
Yep.
Yeah.
Well, what are you working on now, or is there anything new that you can share?
Actually,
at least in the works.
It's some more features to the DuckDB.net library. So they have support for composite types like lists and structs and map and so on. So currently you can't insert those data types from .NET, and working towards making it possible to write those types to the database from the .NET code.
Nice.
Right.
Sounds like you're a busy guy. Is it that you must really love doing this? Do you have a life outside of programming, or is this like your 24/7 obsession?
It's a lot of projects, Giorgi. Yeah.
Yes. There is this joke when software engineer goes on vacation, and finally I can work on my projects now.
Right. Oh, wow.
Yeah. All right. So it's been great talking to you, and wow, what a gem. This is great stuff.
People need to spend some time in these repositories and take a look around. It's some tools that can help you.
Absolutely.
Yeah. So one thing that I think I found on Twitter a couple of weeks ago is, so towards the discussion was, why do software engineers write code after work, and why do they spend their time on something that's that they do as a job? And one of the comments was that engineers like solving problems, they enjoy it, and they work on they spend time after the work because they enjoy solving the problems, so they are just doing whatever they enjoy. So
right,
yeah,
I think that's a good explanation, and
fair enough.
And,
yeah, it's true.
Without a doubt,
it's absolutely true.
And yeah, sometimes I find it hard to explain to other people, like, why are you doing it? And I just enjoy it.
Yeah, I did too. I do it for fun. You know, when I'm looking around and saying, you know, I got a little lull here. Shall I learn some new music on guitar?
Yeah.
No, I'm going to write some code.
Yeah, for sure.
Yeah. All right, Giorgi. Great talking to you, and thanks for sharing the time with us.
Thanks again.
All right, and we'll talk to you next time on .NET Rocks.
.NET Rocks is brought to you by Franklin's Net and produced by Plop Studios, a full-service audio, video, and post-production facility located physically in New London, Connecticut, and of course in the cloud. Online at pwop.com. Visit our website at dotnetrocks.com for RSS feeds, downloads, mobile apps, comments, and access to the full archives going back to show number 1, recorded in September 2002. And make sure you check out our sponsors. They keep us in business. Now go write some code. See you next time.
Got transmitter bands by the FCC. Yes, I'm a toy boy. Life is hard.